thank you for being here. It's an honor.
Well, my joy. Thank you. God bless you. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to start off by saying how it is that I've come to know you, and you're someone that I could actually call my rabbi.
Oh, well, that's very kind.
When I was like 19, 20, I didn't really think there would be someone who I could call my rabbi, just because of all the corruption that I saw within the religious systems, and I just didn't find anyone to be credible, And at that time, when I was just turned 21, kind of realized that there was a lot of lies going on with all of the systems and the institutions that were governing the world. But I think I found myself a little bit too far down the nihilistic road, whereas I was even questioning the validity of the Torah itself. And something that struck me when I talked to you for the first time was that you were comfortable acknowledging the fact that, things are definitely corrupted, and that's not like you had to defend the institution, but at the same time, you doubled down on the fact that despite all of the lies that exist, the 5 books of Moses actually contain the truth. And I was like, well, are you sure? And you're like, yeah, I'm sure. And that was so respectable to hear that from a scholar in the Torah, because all the rabbis that I had spoken to up until that point would always shy away from the Torah. If you'd ask them the Torah has the death penalty for this, and they'd be like, well, a court that would kill someone in 70 years is a bad court. We don't really believe in the Torah's laws. But you were double down and you said, these are God's laws and this is the truth. And you suggested that your son Dan and I read the Torah with a new outlook, just the words itself without commentary, and let the truth speak for itself. And it really has. And I appreciate what you did for me. And I wanted, all the listeners to hear your wisdom and how you have come to discover the 5 books of Moses as being the truth yourself.
Wow. Well, first of all, it's a credit to you that you actually just took the simple advice, which is to read it, because it's been my experience that, and observations for 25, 30 years, that the people were reading the Torah, even if they had the title of rabbi, and think in their own mind that they're immersed in it. They're immersed in extraneous material, and they read the Torah itself in a cursory way. So, and I realized that you had you had your own basis of scholarship, and that was simply influenced by the way everybody else was doing it. And if you simply look at, what if we were all alive at the time of Moses, we would have paid attention to the simple text he was saying, and pay attention to the fact that Moses says is these words. It's this Torah, not some other Torah that exists thousands of years later. And so we might have paid attention. And so let's be simple that way. And that observably changes anyone's life that will look at it that way. Even if someone's not a Jew, if someone's a Christian, the Christians that to me are elevated are the ones that pay attention to what they call the Old Testament. They know it very well. Then that sheds a different light on everything else that opens up for them. Anyway, bottom line is, I was impressed when I told you this. I had the sense that you would take it seriously, and you did. And it was just an awesome transformation. It's like it was exponential watching you. And you're doing such great work with, I've seen most of your posts, and I love them, and they're right on the money for the truth of the Torah. And that's really the thing. The message that I have isn't a personal one. It's really saying, why don't we all just do what the book says and read the 5 books of Moses? That changes. You get a vision of reality as it should be looked at, if you will, a roadmap to how to view reality. And you realize that it's perfect, and reality is obviously God's creation, and you realize only the one who created reality could have written the book, if you will, through the hand of Moses. So that should be the heart of Judaism. Everything in the even Talmudic literature and the traditions, the physical traditions of Judaism, what's the document they hold up in the synagogue? The 5 books of Moses, the Torah scroll. They do that, and to their credit, that's wonderful. But they're not reading it with that's number one. It's the Torah first, then the Tanakh, then the arguably Kabbalistic writing, and the last thing on the list is the Talmud, according to Hazal being the term for the sages that the Jews use for the sages. That's the actual Talmudic position. It's not the ethos of today, even in men who are learned, but their shift is off. And it matters. It matters to young. It matters to everyone. But man, does it disorient young people if they don't get grounded in reality? And reality, the pathway to that is the 5 books of Moses. Anyway.
Well, yeah, no, and granted, it is an impersonal message in the sense that it's just objective. But I know you yourself had a fascinating personal journey, being raised as an American Christian, then going on to become a successful actor and musician, and then converting to Judaism through Orthodoxy and actually finishing the Talmud and raising your children through Orthodox Judaism, and then recently even going past that and recognizing that, it's the Word of God itself. And, I don't know, I just find that to be a fascinating journey.
What I bring to the table when I first started to take, I think I always had an instinctive, even as a young guy who was raised a Christian, to me, there was, the Bible is true, and my mother was a Sunday school teacher, and she started with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and I was just someone who was always oriented towards, I'm into the story of creation, I'm into the story of Adam and Eve and the garden and Noah, and the flood and the aftermath and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Joseph, and the story of Moses and the God speaking to Moses and the Jews at Mount Sinai. I say, the splitting of the Red Sea. This is impressive stuff. Christianity, I dug it. I thought it was beautiful. I still think it's beautiful. Just my orientation was, that's big. And so I was leaning that way. It's the way God directed me to view it. And not to take it away, there's many roads to God. And I do think Christianity is, for me, it was a giant arrow pointing to the 5 books of Moses from my youth. Now, just to expand on that, when I started to take it really seriously, I had a number of children, and I'd had a career and was known around the world to some extent for what I was doing as an actor. So what I was bringing to, when I became really serious about, okay, we really need to know the answers to these things, I was bringing to bear a man in his middle to late 40s with a life experience of someone who is, for lack of a better word, rich and famous, a better phrase, and applying the full range of my intellect to that. And that's not a compliment to myself. It's just what I was oriented to do. And so I have life experience. So what I'm measuring, the truth of something is not based on, oh, that sounds good, or that's more impressive writing or more eloquently said than this book or that book. No, this is true. You don't get that. If I'm reading Dostoevsky and Shakespeare, I'm impressed and I'm interested and engaged, and I realize they know a lot about life, but so do I. And I'm measuring it, and I'm saying, well, I'm pretty much on board with Shakespeare here. I'm pretty much bored with Dostoevsky here. But you know what? I think they're a little off here, a little off there. Nothing like that happens with the 5 books of Moses. Mm-hmm. To give credit to Dennis Prager, who speaks eloquently to the public, I think he says, if it's a choice between me being wrong and the Torah being wrong, I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. So that's his terminology, but I think it's on point. So yeah, but it really matters, and I'm a fan of the culture of Judaism, in a sense. I mean, the rabbinical legacy is awesome in a historical sense. It's greater than the collected works of mankind. Well, I say it's possibly equal to the. We're not talking about the revelation at Sinai. That's from God. The legacy of Judaism is awesome. But the shift of the last, 150, 200 years, there's a deviation that's occurred. I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's still good stuff there. I just think let's just reorder it. How about just reorder ourselves the same way, to the way the sages and the Talmud say? Everything, what the Talmud actually says, not the yeshiva world says, not today's rabbis, but the Talmud unilaterally says that when it's a choice between rabbinical law and Torah law, Torah is preeminent. That's the message of the Talmud. But in the yeshiva world, they won't teach that. In fact, they'll teach the opposite. And where there was an ethos, even when I first came into Orthodoxy, where it was, if you will, to call written Torah and Torah Baal Peh, oral Torah, they were considered they were considered equal, but now there's been a shift even in 30 years. The shift is, no. Torah Baal Peh, oral Torah, supersedes written Torah. That's a shift, and that's ahistorical. It's not accurate. So anyway, the point is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to just reorient people. They put the Torah first, and then there are smart men that have wise things to say. Not a single smart man has anything better to say than what God says. What God, when I say God, I mean the text of the 5 books of Moses. But I wouldn't throw it out. There's a lot of good stuff and can be considered.
Oh, I love the way you describe the difference between reading a man-made book versus a God-written book. Yeah. As a man-made book, you can see one thing, that's smart, that's dumb, that's wise, that's not, that's true, that's false. And there's you can judge there. When you read the Torah, it bursts through everything, and that's it speaks for itself in the sense that it's so in line with reality that it's unbelievable, and to the point that you realize, wow, this actually is the word of God. And I suppose if that's something you could speak on more, just how to identify what is so different about the 5 books of Moses from all of the thousands of books that exist from Jewish scholars and Christian scholars and secular scholars.
Yeah, I don't think you really have to make the case, except to direct people to read it, that it makes its own case. Mm-hmm. It proves itself. The Talmud, for example, the Talmud self-describes as a collection of discussions amongst men, and who frequently will insult each other and belittle each other if they disagree, et cetera, like that. And I will suggest that there are brilliant things in it, but in the same way you'd have to wade through the Federalist Papers or something, and you'd find some good stuff there, but it's a lot of heavy slogging, and a lot of stuff is not that important. I think what the world used to have, that was the baseline discussion. In other words, what's the truth? We are creatures. We are not God. We are created things. And that's what the Torah is telling us. We know that. We could simply examine ourselves and say, are we God? Did we create ourselves? No. So where did we come from? And we start this simple phrases in the beginning, God creates the heaven and the earth. And you say, okay, let's get with the program. And we're getting reality, the nature of reality laid out for us. And that understanding is what built what we call civilization. And wherever that was preeminent, civilization emerged. And what we call primitive is what remained, where that's not extant. So I think that's the real thing, just reading it most people just won't read it. And I think we analyze, if you take out the commentary, and by the way, it doesn't need commentary. It's not like God doesn't know how to communicate. He created the concept of the human. He created the human mind. He created language. He created what the human mind is capable of understanding, and so he knows what he's doing when he is speaking to us. And he lays out reality, and it's a story. It's a narrative. To become familiar with the narrative is the same thing as becoming a waking up to reality, because you see it's exactly true. And who am I following in the story? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, whatever. I can see myself there. I can see every human struggle alive, and I see the nature of civilization. We're we're looking into a world where basically everything we have today exists, minus the technology. But farming, trade, metalworks, clothing, city-to-city trade, commerce, governments, good government, bad government, war, famine, pestilence, all these things, we see what it is. And then you can say, okay, you get in touch with the baseline of life, and that's the beginning of, to paraphrase the Psalm, Reshit Hokmah Yirat Hashem, the beginning of wisdom is fear of God, awareness of what is God wanting for it. By the way, it's a story about God talking to individual men. So we can have, it's self-evident if the story means anything at all, it's God can talk to man can talk to God, and there's a relationship going on. That's what's going on. So the whole idea that's not a possibility, and unfortunately even the modern orthodoxy, has terminology and phrases that says, well, we're not at that level anymore. We don't have that relationship. Things have changed. Well, what's the point of the book? Things are, there's either eternal truth or there's no truth. So I think it's self-evident. By the way, I'm sharing the essence of my life. Things are better, whatever struggle you're facing, if you're thinking in biblical terms, and I mean 10 Commandment terms, to be simple. Be familiar with what those 10 Commandments are. Life will make sense, and everything is better. There will still be struggle, but you can have struggle with grace and goodness, or you can have struggle with misery and suffering and degradation. How about you pick the good side of that?
Yeah. I mean, what I think is fascinating is that people's impulse to deny the 5 books of Moses is that same evil inclination to deny God, right? Because if you're denying his word, then you're denying him, and that's every time people read the Bible, they get triggered by, all of their biases and their preconceived notions about reality. And they're like, oh, well, I disagree with that, and that's sexist, and that's racist, and that's feminist, and like they get upset by all of their modern understandings of reality. But as you say, it's actually an accurate representation of reality, the most accurate that exists. And we'd be much wiser to humble ourselves to that than to, pretend like we have something better to say in the face of God.
Absolutely. I mean, the book of Genesis goes to the heart of that. Essentially, these issues are laid on the table. You don't have to dig it. It's going to be 15, 20 pages into the Bible. You're going to get Adam and Eve in the garden and the serpent and the nature of, remember, God created the serpent, so the serpent and how it operates on Adam and Eve and therefore on us is part of God's message, so that we have something to do with some way of earning the light of God. To jump to the book of Deuteronomy, I set before you the good and the life and the evil and the death. Moses says, choose life. And everything is going to come down to a recognition, I'm here to do the right thing. I have a purpose. I'm a created thing made by God. Only man is made in the image of God. The Torah makes that clear. So I have a purpose. Make these distinctions between good and evil, and recognize that the evil can operate through us. That serpent, if you will, is the metaphor for the nature of reality that we have to combat within ourselves. And if you do it, everything goes well. And if you don't, you get the cards that you don't like very much, you know.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that, unfortunately, that's kind of the message of the Torah, that ever since the beginning, humanity has been rebelling, and, you know, destruction is so commonplace due to our choices and our actions. Because, yeah, if God says, you know, be fruitful and multiply, choose life, and humanity says, oh, we think it's more enlightened to not have children, you know, like, there are anti-life narratives that are on the rise even now that contribute to the terrible situations that people find themselves in. And people don't seem to be able to make that connection, but it's pretty self-evident when you read the Torah.
Well, that's brilliant. That's right on point. God created man in his image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And he blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea and the bird of the sky and every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. Pretty good marching orders. And the Ten Commandments even come later. The whole thing of existence is between men and women, equal before God, doing their job relative to each other to fulfill the purpose of mankind. And frankly, as you said earlier, looking at it any other way is axiomatically nihilistic. It's a complete dead end. So all those manifestations of what they call today social justice and feminism and diversity, and it's just nonsense. Everyone's a male or a female, and they're all mankind, and we have the same marching orders, regardless of where we were born and what country we are, what race we are. Men have their marching orders, women have their marching orders, and we have to get it right between us. And things will go well, you know, things will be good. But if you're fighting that, it's fighting existence itself, you know.
Yeah, I like what you told me about Marxism. You used as an example that all of the principles of Marxism are directly antithetical to the biblical principles. You know, and in general, that's a way to identify bad ideas. Are they in line with the Torah? Then they're a good idea. If they're against the Torah, they're a bad idea. It works every time.
That's really well said. I think you're doing a great job. It's a public service what you're doing, and a blessing. Anyway, you're making the point. Marxism, communism, fascism, by the way, those are all the same thing, you know, socialism. They are not different. Nazism, it is the same thing. We could have hours of discussion of unpacking why that's so. But it's so boring, really. It's the same thing, you know. Distinction without differences. They're all totalitarian. They're just slightly variations on the same theme to achieve the same goal, which is to crush mankind and make slaves out of people.
That's interesting that the absence of God creates tyranny.
Yeah.
Right? That's like the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Right? The alternative to the tyrant Pharaoh is God. And that's how you become redeemed.
Right. Well, in the book of Exodus, it's amazing that the whole idea that God is taking persecuted people out of their persecution to freedom, to live for the sake of God, as opposed for the sake of Pharaoh. That ethos has been taken out. I mean, it started in the late 1960s. Different states in America started outlining the teaching of the Bible in public school, and it eventually succeeded some 60 years later, erasing it from the consciousness of most people, from the public square in any case. So let's shape up and fly right, guys. Let's get it together. Just return to the classic biblical values, biblical worldview of life, and life starts to make sense, starting with men and women are supposed to hook up and make babies together. And sex in that context is very good. For what it's worth, if you take sex out of that context, it will start to degrade spiritually and have consequences which are self-evident in society. Let's use sex for what it's for, and it's better and more exciting. Life takes on dimension relative to that. Then maleness and femaleness has clout and weight that one can apply to the substance of one's life. And things get better. If you're not going to do that, folks, it ain't good. You're not going to like it.
Yeah, well, it's wild to see that obviously in the super religious extremist groups where they, clamp down on sexual expression, you have celibacy and you have that, and that's clearly destructive to sexuality. But even in the secular world where they have the quote unquote sexual revolution and everyone's free, they're still sexless because they're not using sex for what it's supposed to be, which is baby making and the bonding of male and female in the truest sense.
It's like eating and drinking, but there's no nutrition. Do you follow? Or there's no strengthening of the body, mind, and spirit. What would be the point of it then? These things are integrated. God gave us taste so that we can enjoy things, but so that we will take in things that are good for us and live well accordingly. And everything is like that. And sex is at the top of the list, if you will. It's the very first thing that God talks about, is the first commandment, if you will, be fruitful and multiply. And anybody with a brain knows that from way before puberty, men and women young boys and girls are oriented that way. And that can be killed by teaching bad things, false things about it. Anyway, I'm speaking as someone who took advantage of the sensual world that has existed in my lifetime, and, as I say, became a public figure, and even marketed as a sex symbol. So I know something about this. I guess the only point of bringing that up is to say, I know what I'm talking about, is you can't get that wrong. If you want to have sex, that's great. With male-female sex is what it's for. And make babies if you can. If you can't, don't worry about it, but don't interfere with the process. And you will be blessed by God, literally, by engaging with things on that level. And to not do it is, again, a nihilistic waste of life. And it spirals into what people identify as depression. The Bible would call it confusion of the heart, one of the curses.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be accurate to point out that a lot of the limitation on people's ability to have families is a result of the system and the way that it's built, in particular the education system, which keeps young men and women trapped in an institution for the majority of their developing, adolescence and adulthood, where, children is off the table. And I know that you yourself chose to do something that is uncommon and lots of people consider, to be taboo, but you homeschooled your kids. And I assume that's because you identified the corruption within the school system and that education is not limited to a corrupt institution. It's accessible.
Well, it's essential. The whole idea is, look, mankind has to create institutions. Jordan Peterson articulates the nature of hierarchies and their necessity to create value. And I'm going to take that as a sort of baseline starting point that people understand that. But the nature of institutions is that they will become corrupt over time, and they have to be infused with new vitality or purity, goodness, if you will. And you have to watch them. But if you're not watching them and you just figure they work axiomatically, they all become corrupt. And even the modern institution of the church worldwide, it clearly has become corrupt, of the synagogues, if you will. The hierarchy of Judaism is corrupt. That doesn't mean it should be destroyed. So let's reinfuse it with, if you will, the Bible. And primarily, the 5 books of Moses sheds light on every aspect of the biblical corpus from the Tanakh onward into the New Testament. And it's all there. It's all great. But you have to understand it shines from the beginning outward, And then you'll understand the blessings that are in the text. Going back to this thing of schools, only parents, if they're going to read, if people are going to read, the people who are qualified to teach people are people who read the 5 books of Moses and know it really well. They should be able to know the narrative. This happens, this happens, this happens. I get the arc of the story. I get the purpose. It is quite black and white, what's right and what's wrong. And you become knowledgeable about that, then you can teach your children. There are no institutions today that do that. So it's a necessity that parents learn the Bible, know it well, teach it to their children, and everything else will fall in place. Of course, there's math. Of course, there's history. Of course, there's psychology. Of course, there's physics. It'll all work. It'll all be illuminated and be used for a good purpose. But without that basis of, well, it should be self-evident that what happened over the last, since 2019, essentially, the ridiculous destruction of civilization that took place by the so-called respected institutions of the world, and they all collapsed, and they all surrendered virtue and knowledge and common sense, and had themselves, by government directives, locked up and imprisoned and poisoned with complete lies, falsehood, and physical poison. I mean, come on, are the institutions corrupt? I mean, it's anybody who is, say, a rabbi or a Christian minister that wouldn't say that in public and be ashamed and be making public apologies and perhaps even humbling acknowledgement of their deficiencies in fighting it. Now, I know that there's some that did fight it, so there'll be some people who say, no, I knew from the beginning, I told you guys, you didn't listen. Go, guys, you should make that clear too. But that's very, very few people. And there should be some humility in the face of all that. And it does seem to me that a large number of people in the world, certainly many millions, perhaps not a majority at this point, but still many millions, people realize everything we're talking about right now and know it to be true. But they shouldn't be timid in calling that out and observing it and saying it's time to return. It's time to return to the basic 10 Commandment values that drive civilization and created the world that was worth living in up until 2019. Okay. And they shut it down. And they shut it down. And what that did to young people, if parents, what's this, I forget which psalm, Yorat Hashem Sinotra.
Olave Hashem Sinura, those who love God.
Hate evil. You're supposed to hate evil. You're not doing your job, you know. And so get with the program and raise your own children and integrate with people. That doesn't mean you keep them isolated. You're going to be more busy than ever before. And by the way, what's this idea of passing off the raising your children to others anyway? It was basically a governmental idea to socialize people to become effective slaves. And people say, oh, that's good. I get more time to what? What were you doing with your life? Women have more time to what instead of raising children? To
work for the government.
Work in the widget factory, as they say, or work in a cubicle. I don't, it's ridiculous, you know.
Yeah, well, no, clearly the destruction of the family unit through the force of feminism, you know, quote unquote, empowering women to not be women, you know, is a devastating blow to humanity, you know, which obviously men are not doing their job because they're competing with women as opposed to protecting and providing for women, and women are absent from the home, and it's a disaster.
Feminism is completely idiotic, top to bottom. It is satanic. It is the modern version of it is created through the idiotic writings of Karl Marx, and, as you will, to deliberately, whose ethos, as we discussed earlier, was to simply destroy everything that is, literally going through the Bible as a checklist, and where therefore this will be for the opposite. And that's a perfect definition of what the Christian world is called Satanism.
Yeah, one thing I found refreshing in our talks was your openness to criticize the medical system, because the medical system has basically become the new church. Complete worship surrounding doctors and their verdicts and their medicines and their approaches to vaccines and dealing with people and children and the elderly. And again, just to be able to break that hypnosis that they have on the masses, as you mentioned, the 2020 COVID pandemic is such a good example of the medical system exposing just how corrupt they are. And once you realize that, how do people continue to have this unquestionable obedience to human beings just because they have a white coat? Again, it's the same kind of blind faith and cultism that happens in religions.
Many years ago, it became self-evident to me that even before I was immersed in Judaism, that people were too oriented towards doctors for their own good. Putting that aside, I saw in the Orthodox world one very brazen form of idol worship, which is this worship of the medical profession. Mm-hmm. And I would talk about it and figure that it's sort of like and people would even agree with me. Also, yeah, it's too much. We should be more faith-based, or we should just simple common sense health issues. And but then many of the people that would agree with me in principle would go ahead and commit themselves and do themselves enormous harm, or their children enormous harm, by just following whatever doctors were telling them to do. So basically, it should be, from a Judaism standpoint, self-evident that idol worship is out, and but it's very much alive, and it is one of those things. So institutionally, worshiping doctors, that doesn't mean, I'll give you a synopsis of Talmudic advice. Talmudic advice is it's permitted to listen to a doctor. It's forbidden to do everything they say. That was standard Talmudic wisdom. They pay no attention to it. That's what actually it says in the Talmud. But they've thrown that out, and yet they'll say in the name of Talmudic wisdom the opposite of what Talmudic wisdom is. Bottom line is, doctors have their place in the world, but it's limited. You have to look at the whole picture of life. If you went to somebody who was a virologist and you said to them, well, how do you protect yourself against a virus? And he says, well, it's very easy. Just wrap your whole body in plastic and the virus won't get you. Of course, that would kill you, but the virologist would be happy. Obviously, that's an exaggeration, but to make the point of the underlying reality, you have to live your life according to what's possible. You're going to live or die from a virus if God says so. That's what we call plagues in the Torah. And you notice there's no intermediary there. It's just what God says.
Yeah. I think that's the worst crime of the medical system, is telling you that life doesn't work without them. From the moment a baby comes into the world, they need to be injected with 5 different inoculations and vaccines, and then they have a chance at life. As if God didn't create complete humans. It's a terrible thing. And one of the things that you say that I find to be powerful is you don't think that you should vaccinate your kids at all. And even the famed polio vaccine that's considered to be the proof that vaccines cure illness, what would your response be to that?
Well, it's concurrent. The development of the vaccine for polio, for example, is concurrent with the introduction of modern plumbing and the idea that it's bad to have drinking water sources in close proximity to human waste or animal waste. Mm-hmm. And that became, but basically the simple historical answer to that is that by the time the vaccination was used, the statistical presence of, which is in the early 1950s, I'm loose on the date right now because it's a boring subject to me. It's so self-evident.
Are you saying that polio was going away?
Polio was already gone statistically by the time the vaccine became accessible to the public.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so that's the sort of thing. And one is usually impressed with that kind of knowledge when you come upon it and you have all the data and you present it. But eventually you realize it's falling on deaf ears and it becomes boring. Let's just say this works, this doesn't. Take the advice or don't, because you're just going in circles. You want to stop going in circles, read the 5 books of Moses, become knowledgeable in the narrative. You'll become a better person. You'll become wiser. You'll become smarter. And you'll become moral. And if you make any mistakes, you'll be aware of it. And you'll probably correct them. And if you don't, at least you won't be living in an illusion world. You know what you did, and you know where you stand with God. You'll be better off even then, you know?
No, and it does boil down to this human ego thing where people are like, oh, we need to take measures to either, explain God's word or fix the human body. But again, it comes with this unbelievable hubris of a claim that God's word is insufficient and God's creation is insufficient. And there's something that we need to add other than, like God says, fill the earth and subdue it, which means we're able to take measures like cleanliness and filtration of water and like health measures that are within reason of what our obligations are to ourselves as human beings. But once it starts to meddle with God's creation, again, seeing the medical system so willingly, castrating people and butchering them and the claims that they're fixing them, there's the evil is unfathomable.
Well, yeah. And since you mentioned the mutilation of children in the name of gender, what used to be a recognized medical illness is, gender dysphoria. I mean, come on. I mean, the United States is at the forefront of that. In that regard, we're the bad guys worldwide, Not we, the people, but the government. That's the official position of the government. Obviously, most Americans have the fundamental goodness to know that's wrong. But the media is deceitful. The medical profession is deceitful. The Justice Department is deceitful. I mean, come on.
What's left?
What's left? So the bottom line is there is a way forward in all of this, which is simply connect yourself to who am I and what am I. There's this beautiful liturgical poem. Let's give some credit to the rabbis. Sharpen your mind and consider who you are and what you are. Where do you come from? Where are you going? What power animates you and to what purpose? Now live. Things will be better. And even just taking a biblical analogy, the Jews, when they were enslaved in a crushing slavery, they still multiplied tremendously, didn't they, under Pharaoh? And they were redeemed through the process of living life, being fruitful and multiply, and God himself intervenes. And you can live that out, and there's obviously large sociological redemptions, but that doesn't block. You don't have to wait on God for personal redemption. If you just start living on a simple level, there is God. He spoke to Moses and the Jews at Mount Sinai. It's the basis of all the world religions. Why don't we just accept that and act accordingly, and things will get better. And they won't get better in a long, long time from now. They'll get better right away. So I'm giving personal authority to that. That's just observable truth. It's not just true in my life. It's true everywhere I observe things. Going back to the medical profession, it was long before the pandemic. Before there was a phrase called anti-vaxxer. I had the blessing of having children in my 20s and 30s and 40s. And so I saw what would happen in the attitudes of the medical profession. And I saw the increase in the number of vaccines. And I noticed that they were getting sick in a way that children from vaccinations can get as sick. If they don't die, they're very close to death. And for something that if they hadn't taken the injection, the statistical odds were just overwhelming that they would never have been exposed to that in the first place. So it's a protection against something that effectively doesn't exist, and it's actually is a poison.
Yeah, no, the neurosis and the fear, and that's again how they kept everyone locked up for years during the COVID is just using fear and the unknown against people, as opposed to saying, yes, we exist in the unknown. Yes, we're powerless before God, but we're subject to God's judgment, and that's where faith comes in.
Yeah. Now to the other point on a moral issue, that's just an objective opinion based on personal experience. If you have a society in which, well, here's the principle. The principle is not idiotic, that you could inoculate yourself and build up a resistance to something, and that could be true. But exactly what is appropriate for each individual would be guesswork for anybody, and especially, and you multiply that exponentially if it's a baby or a child. What I was about to say was, in a world in which you're free to take it or not take it, there's nothing wrong with having these choices. You can make your own judgments, but they are serious. They are consequential. Yeah, I think there's this guy, Robert Malone, famously, he's probably one of the most credentialed doctors in history, and he's a public speaker that is a heart specialist, I think, who's been talking a lot about, say, at this point, his opinion is don't vaccinate at all. Don't trust it. This process is corrupted. So that's a guy who's probably my age and, spending his whole life doing this. Anyway.
Well, I think as you were saying, within all of this, the hopeful message is that the individual is stronger than the community, in the sense that God will redeem even the single person in the midst of endless corruption.
Yeah, and
all is not lost.
Yeah, and by the way, there's a way forward that doesn't depend on whether or not your idiot neighbor is an idiot or a genius, which you don't get to pick who your neighbor is. You have a way forward you can proceed yourself. If you can just be as good as you can be, that makes a difference, and you'll have a good relationship to God. That's what the narrative tells us in the Torah. That's the Torah narrative, how individuals learn to relate with God over myriad experience and circumstances, which you can recognize and see threads of in anyone's life. And you can learn about yourself that way, and you can learn, and you can measure your own experience against the experience of the patriarch, and one can become closer to God in the process. And by the way, an individual who, for lack of a better word, is good, he creates a good marriage, they create good children, that good children, a number of people who are good individuals or good families unite, then you have a good community, then you have a good city and a good state and country, if you will.
Ultimately,
it can work that way. You have something to do while you're waiting for something otherwise outside for other individuals to do things, and you're out of control, which is exactly the hopeless narrative that corrupt institutions because it keeps you a customer.
Yeah, no, waiting for someone else to come do the work for you.
Yeah.
But ultimately, yeah, if we, as God tells us to, put in the work, create this healthy moral community where individuals are strong with God, that actually is the shining light for the rest of the world. And I know that even in the prophets, that's a consistent theme with, if the Jewish people were to be living in their land with God's presence, that would be somewhere where all the nations would stream to learn from the principles of justice that God has given to the people of Israel. That's supposed to be something that can inspire everyone, but it has to start somewhere.
Exactly. It can start with you and me. It can start with you, and we don't have to wait on anything. I think a point you and Dan make, Dan is my second youngest son. You guys hang out a lot, thank God. Makes the point that if you take out all the commentary of the 5 books of Moses, you're dealing with something about the size of a C.S. Lewis novel, 250 pages, 250 pages, something like that. Yeah. I mean, come on, you could read that, and don't be impressed if you get with commentary and translation and everything else. And by the way, the translations are by and large good. King James is a solid translation.
Definitely good enough to get the message.
Definitely exactly.
Enough to get the message.
Exactly. And obviously that's such a tertiary issue. You can read it's readable and knowable, and it'll change your life. So many people say, "Oh, I know that. I read it once." They read it as a child, or they heard lectures. People who go in the synagogue and they're hearing the parashah of the week, and they say, "Well, I go through the Torah every year." They really don't. They're not paying attention. And the nature of the lectures is to lead people away in the synagogue, in the Orthodox synagogue. It leads people away from the plain meaning of the text into some midrashic, which is folklore, a rabbinical explanation, which many times, more often than not, is actually the opposite conclusion of what the text implies. An interesting dissertation, as long as you knew the difference, that says it's like measuring this and that, and we can see that's okay. But they do not know the difference. They actually think it's the midrash, the folklore, if you will, is the same thing as the text. And they can be diametrically opposed. Most of the time, it's to devolve power. It's for political purposes. It devolves power to the rabbis. There are times where there's an interesting philosophical point to give credit where credit's due. So I don't throw the thing out, and I don't see anything wrong that you can't know the entire midrash and that you can't know the rabbinical commentary, so that you're wise, because the rabbinical commentary is history. It is the truth of how they manage things and how sometimes they continue to manage things. It's good to know that. It's good to know the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. You should know that. What worked in Greek history and not. But what's the difference between Greek history and Greek mythology? You should be able to make those distinctions. But if you don't know the original source Torah, and Judaism is even richer than all of that. But if you don't, it's so simple to read the 5 books, then you know the baseline, and all of those things can fall into place.
Yeah. And just the very simple distinction between the Word of God and the Word of man.
That's right. Yeah, you can't get more basic than that.
Yeah, it's just shocking because, again, they have this ridiculous story that all of these words of thousands of men with conflicting opinions somehow are all from Sinai, and it's like a laughable statement.
Right, yeah. That is laughable, but the body of work is certainly meritorious. We're talking about the inclination of the current crop of teachers, which are worldwide. They're in Israel, they're in France, they're in everywhere. It's a way of teaching that blurs these distinctions, as you say, between the Word of God and the writings of man. This is not to discredit the historical body of work, which is literature and history, as well as this philosophy. But even with its really good philosophy or interesting philosophy, that doesn't measure up to the Word of God. And how are we defining the Word of God? Simply the same way everyone's defined it. Even the Catholics who created Christianity said, "Oh no, the beginning of our book is Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." None of this makes sense. We don't do that. Even the people who've been historically antithetical to Judaism, if you will, of the Inquisition of Spain, etc., they wouldn't separate themselves from that legacy, to their credit, in spite of any other flaws. And I don't mean to disparage. I know there are good-hearted men and thoughtful men and sharp men and God-fearing men in the rabbinical community worldwide. They are, however, a minority. But that's true about everything, all the time, everywhere. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, yeah, I think we've covered the religious institution, the educational institution, the medical institution. Those are all much more serious, governing structures on society. But then you have the entertainment industry, which you were a part of. And I wonder what you could speak to on that, because clearly there's, people love entertainment, and fair enough, there's beautiful music and film and stuff like that. But there's also so many poisonous narratives that come through that institution as well.
Yeah, well, that's, first of all, what is it that makes people, what we call, tell stories? So entertainment, how do you find it? Music and art, I mean, painting, sculpture, poetry, plays, playwrights is an ancient art form. The novel's relatively modern. So drama, if you will, but drama is storytelling. And so that in the early part of the 20th century, the technology of film became predominant way of telling stories for the world. And they turned to the best of Western civilization's literature, So, and the storytelling was exciting. In other words, they're going to make movies. They're going to do a Charles Dickens story, or they're going to do Shakespeare. Now, what has happened? If you move away from why do we know what a good story is? Well, because God, if you will, through the hand of Moses, wrote it down for us. You're not going to get a better story than in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth and the history of mankind. And that's really great stuff. And then you go right through the biblical corpus, right? That's great stuff. And people are inspired by that. Oh, another interesting point is there, historically speaking, Greek culture, which is very important historically, it's all of it. I think people assume that it's more ancient than the history of the Jews, if you will. And just to put it, the city-states of Greece were just being formed when Solomon's temple stood in Jerusalem. Just to put it,
The Greek Empire wasn't around even until the Second Temple.
That's right, exactly, right.
Before the Romans.
I just want to throw that note in there as to what constitutes civilization. But so even the best of what the Greeks had, there was people like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They had a lot. They were well read, and they did have that the revelation at Sinai, the 5 books of Moses, and as a baseline for the creation of the nature of storytelling, art, history. What is history? That was there for them to work with, and.
So would you say that's where, you see the shift from old film acknowledging what traditional storytelling is?
No, actually, so just going back to, having said that, that represents a legacy of storytelling right through the Jewish writings of what we call the Tanakh, stories of Samson and Delilah and King David, dramatic stories. This is the baseline, and then Greek storytelling, the Greek playwrights. Everyone was building that into the Western culture. And so when the film business came along, that was the baseline for storytelling. When they took the Bible out of the public school arena, now you have stories told by people who are in their 40s and 50s, that mature, talented people who don't have the ethos of what a good story is in their consciousness. And that sort of explains it all, as far as I'm concerned.
They've lost the thread.
They lost the thread of what storytelling is. They have talent without the base for what makes a story worth telling. So then you can get into, obviously that devolves into the political narrative of destroy everything that is, destroy it. If you look at the old Disney films, for example, it's very clear who's the good girl, who's the bad girl, who's the hero, who's the villain. Is the good girl faithful and steadfast and pure of heart, or is she promiscuous and flighty and unreliable? We get the idea. We understood. Okay, that's the good girl. This is the good girl is the pure of heart. The bad girl is this one. The villain is this guy. The hero is that guy. That, if you don't know what's right and wrong, how the hell are you going to make those distinctions? And it just doesn't resonate. So if you have a heroine who's not virtuous, she's not going to be the heroine. If you have a hero that's not courageous in the face of adversity, in spite of his flaws, he's not the hero, So that fundamental thread is what was lost. So
can I ask you, was the, Hollywood devolving into immorality, was that part of the reason why you chose to leave acting?
No, I think the number of children that God gave me was totally a surprise to me. And I have, to not be obtuse, God bless me with 6 sons. That became more, raising children and to the truth of God, if you will, is more important. So it became more interesting to me. And then God blessed me in other ways, and I didn't need to do it. But I still kept my hand in it regarding music and things like that. But the things that were going on in the movie business, I did a TV show. All of those things. This is mild, that I was playing a character, Daniel Boone, an American folk hero. So not a historical figure, Daniel Boone. It's called Young Daniel Boone. Was the Daniel, D-A-N''L was the show. And in it, Daniel Boone historically was a famous Indian fighter, prior to the formation of the United States. And there's a lot of history and drama. So, but it was wrong to kill Indians. The television executive said it's wrong to kill Indians. So is this a comedy in which it's Daniel Boone, the inept Indian fighter, or what's the nature of the story? So
It's also not historically accurate.
It's not historically accurate. So those factors, that seems so mild, as today, by today's standards, is how they distort things.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm just saying those things were always there, the politics of can we do this or can we say that? But good works of art exist, and where people say, look, this is the statement, let people figure it out. And I wouldn't say I was ever really disenchanted with it. At a certain point, I decided to write things and engaged in some independent filmmaking. And I'm happy to have done that. I have absolutely no complaints on a personal level with the entertainment industry. We all have to deal with what's a good story and what's not. And is our own life a good story or not? That's the point of things.
I remember I asked you why you didn't write a book, and you said, well, take a look at all my music. That is my book. And that's 100% accurate, and I would encourage the listener to check out your music, Rick Moses. I find your music to be definitely the top inspirations for my own performance and songwriting. I just think that your music is so true to what music is, all at the same time sophisticated and has great melodies and musicality. So it's amazing. But yeah, absolutely, your music is so full of content and substance, in the sense that the messages are life affirming and explain the human condition and how people go through struggles and joy and pain and everything in between. And I guess if you could just describe your process with songwriting and how you see music inform our lives.
Well, you said that so beautifully, and by the way, kindly, thank you. The process is pay attention. Some of the songs are almost involuntary. Many of them I'm simply compelled, whether it's the middle of the day or the middle of the night, stop what I'm doing. I'm literally like I'm being directed, write this, and then it takes me a while to digest what just happened. And some of it is, you get an idea, you think about it, you put it aside, and you make notes. And I've been blessed. Look, music has been very rich internationally. There have been great songwriters and the great composers of what's called the Great American Songbook. The Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim, legacy of music, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Rodgers and Hart, the musical theater, jazz, great artists like Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. I love what you're doing. You're summarizing things exactly the way I would summarize them. What I love is that what I shared with you, you've taken it and run with it, and do what you're supposed to do with it. And as you will, coming back to music, I simply do that with usually is my primary form of communication, is in the composition, the songwriting, if you will, and integrate that into the point of the communication. It's gratifying because that's the message. But I know the message is, for something to be good, it's not ego-driven. It's not about my message. That I get the truth of life, an aspect of the truth of life, that I faithfully get it across, and that people can benefit from that, I've been blessed that there's some degree of success, in my work there. I hesitate to call it my work because I think it.
Well, I mean, that's the opposite of propaganda, though. You're not coming with an agenda. You're, as you said, it's even involuntary, to the extent that you're just, as a vessel for God's message, hopefully.
That would clearly be the idea. Anyway, I started to make a list of important entertainment people or singers and musicians. And actually, it would be impossible, to get everybody in there. I didn't even get to the rock era. Obviously, the seminal influences like Bob Dylan, the Beatles, the Stones. They're terrific songwriters, from Neil Diamond to Randy Newman, and Leonard Cohen. So we all stand on the shoulders of those come before us, and hopefully we can engage, each of us in our time, make some contribution that and our shoulders hopefully will be used for others to stand on. That's the idea. I'm just tremendously pleased you're doing what you're doing, Israel. This is what rabbis are supposed to do. Tell the truth about what does it say in the Torah, direct people towards that, and clarify it. But clarification isn't that hard because it's simply restating what you see. Maybe you didn't notice it says this. I'll point to where, so it's not coming from me, and that's why you should do it. Not because I said so, but because that's what it says. Right. And they go, oh yeah, actually now I will, because I know that came from God, if you will. It's, or however you want to characterize that. It's divinely inspired at the highest level known to man.
Yes.
That's what we mean by it's from God. Mm-hmm. You can't do better than that.
Yeah.
But we as individuals can tap into that. But how would we know, for example, that we're doing on the right course? Maybe some dark forces are interfering with that. And the answer is, well, you have the book as the yardstick. Is that my interpretation? Or does the book say I can or cannot do this? It says, no, I can't do that. So that's obviously not. There's a way of filtering things out.
Well, yeah, that would be the importance of sticking to the literal word, because you know that you're not deviating based off of your own interpretation. Or
anyway, I'm pleased we covered a lot of ground.
I think we covered all the ground. The only thing would be if you had something in particular you wanted to address. But
well, hopefully we get a chance to do this again, because there may be something that comes to mind after the fact. Many of the stories that go on in our lives are the lives that you are involved with my sons, and so we know each other, and there's interesting dynamic things happening. It might be interesting to share from time to time. And so on that level alone, the big picture stuff we covered, I liked your summaries better than the way I spoke about them, so keep doing that. And I didn't think it was necessary to sort of bring to the table detailed analysis of why an institution is corrupt or that, because it should be at this point. That became boring to me a long time ago. I used to rattle that stuff off but there's other people who are very competent, the Ben Shapiro's of the world and Jordan Peterson, et cetera, They're very competent at getting that stuff right and breaking it down. And it should be, there's stuff we have to get that's beyond that, you know. Meaning they're all correct. Keep that in mind. But there's stuff behind that. And we have to get to that. And it should be obvious as, you know, the difference between right and wrong, good and evil on sociological matters. Whether or not it's good to have babies, whether or not it's okay to mutilate children, whether or not the government should mandate medicines, which are, even if, whether or not they are poisons, you know, if that should be a thing. That should be as obvious as the difference in height between a giraffe and a mouse. You know, the answer to all those things is no. You know, don't do any of those things, you know. And and yes, men and women you don't have anything more important to do than get your relationship right. Men be manly, women be womanly, make babies, and raise them to know the 5 books of Moses, and all their other skill sets will come into place, and there will be many, and that will be wonderful, and the world will be a better place. So thank you.
Amen.
On that.
Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Thank you.